Alright, this lesson is about making decisions, and I'll be talking mostly about kind of big life decisions in this lesson. First decision that we'll talk about is marrying or not marrying. So we'll talk about some of the advantages of getting married first. You can save money by sharing expenses. Things like housing or transportation, you can save some money there by having two people paying for, one house instead of one person paying for one house. If you get married, it will be easier to start a quote unquote traditional family with, kind of two parents and, any number of children. It's not that you can't have like family or children if you don't get married. But yeah, I guess it's just the more traditional route. And another advantage, obviously, if you get the right person, this relationship or this marriage can fulfill your need for human connection. And I guess you're not lonely by yourself. You're with people all the time and family all the time. So there are also disadvantages to getting married. One of them may be that you have to maybe compromise or give up some of your independence or freedom. And that can look like different things. For example, you might be sharing meals for the most part. If you disagree with your partner on, what to eat, then somebody's going to have to compromise, or maybe you'll just make two different things. I don't know. That's like a minor example, but there might be other kind of examples too. And we come back to children, for example. This is a big one that does come up, is that maybe one partner would like to have children and the other partner would not like to have children, and there again, like, some kind of compromise is needed, and like that's a pretty big compromise for the person who is kind of compromising, right? If you get the wrong person, your kind of life is might be pretty miserable because it's such an intense relationship, and that partner is so close to you. It's not like having, a casual friend and, oh, it turns out that casual friend is not that great and you can just drop them. In this situation, it's not quite that simple. Not to say that it's impossible to get out of this kind of a situation. As we know, many people do get divorced or separated. So it is possible, but it is a much bigger deal than a small casual relationship. And yeah, I mean, it is kind of hard, right? Because obviously nobody goes into a marriage intending to get divorced, right? So it is there's a lot of challenges to kind of overcome in that process. Another kind of big decision is, like, not just should I get married, but should I get married to this person? Is this the right person? So there's a few things I think that you should consider when you're making that pretty big decision. And some of them relates to like some of the relationship things that we've already talked about. But like the first point is your relationship based on mutual respect and clear communication. So if you don't have that in your relationship as you're dating and stuff, then that's something that you should probably address before you decide whether you're going to marry this person. Do you love them? Do they love you? This is pretty important because of kind of the next thing is, can you imagine being with this person for the next rest of your life, if that's 50, 60, 70 more years of that person as a major part of your life. And so I think one way that you can help determine if that is the case or not is your relationship kind of matured? So have you spent some time together? Have you maybe gone on trips together or lived together, overcome challenges together, had like conflicts that you're able to then resolve together? So all of these things kind of strain and stress and test a relationship in some ways. And if your relationship can survive those things, then that makes it that much more likely that this relationship is strong enough and can kind of stand the test of time. Let's talk about children. Should you have kids or not? So I would say that this is the biggest decision that you will make in your life, because this decision is irreversible. With other things like career, okay, you can change careers. You go to this university, you can change universities. With kids, once you have made a decision and had kids, they will always be there. So this is the one decision where it's not possible to change. So having kids is very intense. The challenges are huge, and you can imagine you are responsible for this other life, and you'll spend the first at least 20 years kind of supporting them. And in the early years, you're not just supporting them, you're literally have to devote your life to kind of caring for them, because obviously babies are not able to do most things on their own. Challenge is huge. It's going to completely overturn your life. But on the other hand, the rewards are also pretty huge. It's hard to describe if you haven't ever been there, right? But the feeling that you get when you are holding your newborn child in your arms is really one of the most intense feelings that you ever could have. Imagine the most happiest that you've ever felt. This might be way more than that. And so really intense, positive, but really humongous challenges at the same time. Biggest life decision, we've mentioned that. No refunds, cancel. We've also mentioned that this is kind of an irreversible thing. There are, for some people, kind of expectations from the family that you have kids. For some people, they take it on themselves and they have those expectations on their self that they will have kids or not have kids. And sometimes people feel pressure or expectations from society that you would have kids. But really, I mean, it's up to you. Try to not. These expectations are there, and you will take them into account. But don't make your decision based on that. Base it on like your own feelings of what you should do. One thing that comes up all the time is, are kids expensive or cheap? Well, a lot of people think that having kids is expensive, and it definitely can be, right? In the early days, you have to pay for a lot of things, like diapers and special furniture for the kid, cribs and whatnot. And childcare. Obviously, we've talked about how expensive childcare can be, although hopefully it will become cheaper by the time that you are having kids yourself. And then as the kids start to grow up, they're not in diapers anymore. You don't have to keep buying clothes for them every 3 months, but then they start to do activities. And I'm sure a lot of you folks are in, activities or lessons or stuff like that, or you want to go on school trips, and all of those things are costing money, and so the expenses of childhood and childcare are replaced with kind of other expenses as they grow up. And then later on, as your kids are going to university or buying their first home and stuff like that, you might want to help them out in those areas. And so there's more money that you have to spend. It can be costly for sure, but it doesn't have to be. You can do it quite, inexpensively as well. It just depends on what decisions that you're making for your child. Maybe your child can't go on that trip to Europe. Maybe your child will not go to, violin lessons. There's a lot of activities and things that can fulfill children that are cheap or free or provided through school and stuff like that. And so maybe you will say to your child, sorry, we can't afford, or we're choosing not to pay for, gymnastics class or something, but you can certainly join your school track and field team. It can be expensive or it can be cheap. Really depends on your decisions as a parent. Other factors, so there's obviously tons of factors that go into this decision of whether you're going to have kids or not. Other things that people sometimes consider is like the world that you're bringing a child into. If you have a pessimistic or negative outlook on the future, if you think that the earth is overcrowded and you don't want to add to, more people, if you think the apocalypse is coming, then those may be possible reasons why you would not want to bring a child into this world that you think is so terrible in the first place. Reasons why you might want to have children, like for some people, the family kind of continuing, having a legacy and continuing your family line is important for some people. For some people, having family is important, and the more family you have, the more kids you have, the better. Potentially someone that will, care for you when you're older. So that might be a consideration for some people as well. So there's lots and lots of different things to think about when deciding whether or not to have a child. One thing that I want to mention about having kids or getting married is the timing. So a lot of people delay things until later, or they decide not to do something because of kind of financial reasons. Usually this is due to financial reasons, or they think that having kids will change their lifestyle too much or something like that. And those are definitely valid, but I would say in general, my philosophy anyways, is that consider your long-term happiness over or more important than your short-term happiness. So if you are feeling like you don't have enough money to have a kid right now, and so you decide I'm never going to have a kid, that is a very drastic decision that, because you were in maybe not as well off for these few years, and then you base this decision never to have children based on that. I think that's kind of a pity, because your long-term, you kind of, you can make anything work for the short term, but for the long term, if you have made a decision not to have kids, you can't kind of go back when you're 60 years old and revisit that decision. And so the long term is just so many more years than the short term that I think the long term should have kind of priority when you're making decisions like that. This is an entire field in economics called future value, and how people prioritize kind of short term and sacrifice long term. I think you should sacrifice short term to get the reward long term. Education, we've already spent quite a bit of time talking about education, what to study, where to study. But I think in general terms, you should try and maximize both enjoyment and passion, and also practicality. So you want to study something that will allow you to support yourself, but also something that you will enjoy or feel passionate about. Both of those things are important. Another decision is moving. So here I'm talking not about moving to a different house, but moving to a different city or a different country. And if the opportunity comes up, generally I would say, yeah, go for it. Reason being that when you move to a different place, you will get new experiences and try new things. And it's also not permanent. You can move back anytime you want. And so, yeah, generally, I would say go for it. Um, would I specifically want to move? For me, at least, I never did. For you, you might think, Vancouver. Who needs Vancouver? I'm going to go somewhere else, somewhere better, and that's totally fine. For me, the opportunity came up. If you'll recall my story, I lived in Ottawa for 2 or 3 years, and I also lived in China for 3 years. Those opportunities came up. I wouldn't say randomly, but I would say it wasn't like I I moved there for jobs because I happened to get jobs in those places, and yeah, I went for it. But I didn't like move there to move there and then find a job when I was there. I didn't do it that way, but that's certainly something that you could do. There are like really great places to try out and live in. And yeah, pretty worthwhile. And like I said, you can always move back. Housing. So the big decision in terms of housing is kind of renting or buying. And housing is actually the biggest part of most people's budget. And so the impact that you have when making a decision in this area, financially, it can be pretty drastic. So anyways, like what's better, buying or renting? Well, let's talk about buying. So buying is more expensive than renting, almost always, I would say, always. So it's really expensive. It gives you a lot of debt, right? So you have this huge mortgage and you're in debt for the next 30 years. It gives you a lot of headaches in terms of that you have to do maintenance on your property. You're responsible if anything happens. And so that can be a real problem. But at the end of the 30 years, you own that property. It's yours. And so that is, I guess, the big advantage in buying, right? You will no longer have to pay rent or pay a mortgage. You can just live there. In terms of renting is cheaper. It's also more flexible. So, you can live anywhere and just leave whenever you want. If you're so like I have said before, like you do usually sign 1 year leases. But after that 1 year, you can move whenever you want. And even before 1 year, during your lease, you can still leave. You just will, you at worst, you will lose 1 month of extra rent. But it's the kind of flexibility that you don't have when you're buying. You can still, of course, when you're buying, you can still sell your house and buy another house. That is definitely possible. But it's much more involved process, and it's much more costly to kind of switch like that when you are an owner and not a renter. The disadvantages of renting is that you will have less control. So potentially, your landlord will make decisions that will affect you. For example, if your landlord decides to sell the place that you are renting from the landlord, then you potentially have to move, right? Somebody else bought it and they want to move in, so too bad for you. You don't, like in terms of maintenance, yes, your landlord is taking care of the maintenance, but they might not take care of it in the way that you prefer. Say your, washroom faucet breaks. Okay, let's get a new one. Landlord does it, so you don't have to worry about it. But maybe they got one that you didn't like. Or, walls need painting. Landlord paints it. He paints it an ugly color that you don't like. So you lose some control over your own living space because you don't own it. And another reason why not to rent is that you will be renting like forever because you will never own anything. So you will always have to rent. So even after 30 years, the person who bought doesn't have to pay anymore. You're still paying rent all the time. Financially, which one would you be better off, renting or buying financially? Well, it depends a lot on a lot of different factors. Depends on your interest rates. So with a higher interest rate, buying will be more expensive. It depends on, you're saving money if you're renting. What are you going to do with that saved money? Are you going to spend it all on vacations, or are you going to invest it, right? So that's going to make a difference. It depends on the appreciation rate of your property. So as we know in Vancouver, the prices go up very quickly. So if you bought a place for 500,000 in 2010, maybe by 2020, that place is now a million. So it doubles in 10 years or so. It's probably more like 12 or 13 years. But in other places, the doubling rate or the rate that it increases may not be as fast. And so the value of what you own at the end is not as high as maybe you would have gotten in the stock market or something like that. So financially, it depends on all these different factors. So in the end, the financial aspect of it, whether you end up ahead or not, is probably not something to kind of totally base your decision on. More basing it on kind of your lifestyle and what you're able to afford. Okay, so those were just a few of the big decisions that I wanted to get more into the specifics of. But obviously, there's lots of other kind of decisions that you'll be making in your life. And I wanted to just give you a general approach that you can take to making decisions like that. So number one is do as much research as possible. Find out about the different options. In general, people research too much on small things and too little on big things. Like they may spend, weeks researching whether to buy a $10, item on Amazon, but when it's like comes to a house, like the biggest purchase you'll ever make, they may just, put down an offer in a week or two or something. So make sure you are doing your research, especially on the big things. Don't limit your research to the internet. The internet can be a great source and is a great source, but sometimes it's not 100% reliable as well. So the best, I think, is to find people that you trust and ask them for their experiences. Those information combined with like your internet research and stuff gives you a better overall picture. You can make a pros and cons list. I'm sure you've done that before. And I think look into the future. So project into the future and think about, is this decision a good decision? Will it be correct 10 years from now, 20, 30, 40 years from now? So try and imagine yourself in that future and looking at this decision now and if this is the right decision. I've already talked about how I kind of weight the long-term future more than the short-term considerations because there's just so many more years in the future, right? And then look at the alternative choices that could be made as well. Once you've finished all your research, which may take like a while, especially for a big decision, you may be doing weeks or months of research. Once that's done, I would say give yourself a short time to make a decision. It could be minutes, it could be hours or days, but we're not talking about months or years. That's too long a time period to make a decision. Once you have all the information, you shouldn't spend that long on the decision. That's what's called analysis paralysis. So you're kind of paralyzed. You can't kind of decide, and you just kind of get stuck, right? All decisions can be reversed or canceled in some way, although they may be a price, and that price may come in terms of time, effort, money, right? So you buy a house, you can sell it. You rent an apartment, you can leave and rent somewhere else. You have you go to a school, you can change schools. You get married, you can get divorced if your values allow for that, I guess. The one that can't really be reversed or canceled, I've mentioned before, having children. Progress cannot be made unless you make decisions. And so there's something called bias to action. And that's one of the biggest predictors to success in the business world. So doing things taking actions, making decisions will get you further ahead than not making decisions and just kind of maintaining status quo. Even if not all your decisions are correct, if your decisions aren't correct, you can correct them. And the decisions that were already correct, those are improving your life already. So just make decisions. Elon Musk, if we don't have to roll back 10% of all the decisions, we aren't moving fast enough. And we know that how, kind of successful he has been. So obviously that is talking about the business world, but I think those ideas are also somewhat applicable to personal life as well. It's just this kind of framework of thinking about making decisions, and try and make decisions even if they're not correct. You can adjust course after the fact. All right, so hopefully that was useful or at least interesting. And so that's all for this lesson, and we'll see you in the next one.